Hey everyone, thanks for joining me back for another episode here at Blended Graphics. I wanted to continue my overgrown animals series. I've already done an overgrown tortoise and a hermit crab. This time around we are going to create a polar bear. And unlike the other two, which was a speed art episode, this one's actually going to be a step-by-step tutorial on how I created this image. However, I will still add some speed art elements throughout this video just so I'm not boring you guys and so that this video is also not going on for like 45 minutes or to an hour. I want to keep it relatively short. Alright, so without further ado, let's just jump right into this project and let's get started. Alright, so here we are with our canvas. It's 5000 by 4000 pixels at 300 pixels per inch, just a 5:4 ratio. I'm going to turn on our ground that we're going to get started with. And the first thing that we want to do is just isolate that ground. So let's go to our quick selection tool here and let's just try to grab a selection of this ground. I don't want the sky. Alright, and once we're happy with this, we can come down to our little layer mask icon down here and then hit that. And then we'll just hit Command T and we're going to drag this down to the bottom just to get started with. Okay, perfect. So hit that check mark. Let's turn on our polar bear. This time we're going to use the select subject feature and then hit the layer mask again for this, and that should do a good job. Yeah, so that looks really good. And now we can start to scale up the ground a little bit here and start tinkering around with this. So this is just kind of trying to find a nice little area that I want to put the polar bear on. We're going to scale him up as well, but for right now we just want to move the ground into a good spot for us. So something like that I think looks pretty good. Maybe shift this off to the left a little bit. Yeah, because I want to get some of that sunlight that's on the right side. I want that incorporated into the composition. So perfect, we'll hit the check mark. We'll go to our polar bear this time and now scale this guy up. And we want to center him up somewhere right there. And that should be just fine for us. Okay, so I'm happy with where we are right now with this guy, and we're gonna bring in our next ground layer. So let's go ahead and turn this little mountain range, and just like the first time around, we wanna select just the mountains and then hit that layer mask icon so we can separate that from the sky. And I'm really just kind of focused on the left side of this mountain range. I just wanna capture that mountain that's off to the left. So something like this I think will look really good. And now we can start building up this sky. So I'm going to do this layer by layer. I have a few different images and we're going to start with this one first. I kind of like the pink tones and I want that incorporated. Next we'll drag this up here and shift this off to the right side. And once we're happy with that, we're going to just use a soft round brush and blend these two together. Remember, if you're using the black, that's going to paint away. Painting white switches it up, so if you do too much, just switch your colors around and just go with whatever works best for you. Okay, so let's go ahead and bring one more image in, and this one's going to go up to the top here, so you can always just press Command T, scale this up a little bit, and we're going to nudge this up to the top here. And just like before, let's just go ahead back to our soft round brush after we added that layer mask and blend these two together. There's no right or wrong reason or answer to this. It's just personal preference, whatever you like, just, you know, kind of go with the flow. Alright, so I'm pretty happy with that. I'm going to bring back our polar bear, and this cloud image is going to enhance that lighting on the right side, make it a little bit more dramatic. So that's what I want to be our main light source. And we're going to blend this in. Now I'm thinking that the left side of this canvas is looking a little bare, so that first image we brought in, we're just going to make a copy of that by Controller Command J, and we're going to drag this off to the left so we can have more of the pink tones just on that left side and have a nice little balance. Alright, so I'm just going to stretch this top clouds down just a little bit just so that some of those pink clouds just line up a little bit better and create more of a seamless transition. And then we can do some other little modifications on here. But I'm pretty happy with this. Alright, so for this next section now, I'm actually going to speed through it just because we're going to do more of the lighting and color adjustments, but I'll talk through it as we go along. So the first thing that we're going to add is a level adjustment layer, and I want to create a bit more contrast and brighten up some of those white spots here. Next, we're going to add a color, solid color adjustment layer put into linear dodge blend mode, just to enhance that glow and some of that color on the right side, and then using the selective color adjustment layer, just fine-tuning some of those tones to get the right color that at least I am looking for. And so I'm actually going to spend a little bit of time with this, with our color grading process, kind of alternating between our color balance adjustment layer, selective color, and then using solid colors and different blend modes, just to kind of fine-tune some of these tones and make them look consistent. Now that our scene is starting to come together in terms of our color, what we can start to do is using our color picker tool here and just selecting some colors and start adding a little bit of haze in our background just to create that atmospheric depth, as well as creating a little bit more of that warmth coming from that sunlight in the background there. Alright, at this point I'm noticing that I actually want to enhance some of these highlights here, so using the levels adjustment layer, increasing the highlights to make those a little bit more intense and stand out. And then going back to our color picker just to sample some of these colors to add that haze in the background as well, and again give it a little bit more warmth in those reddish tones coming from the sun. I can even use some of our solid color adjustment layers here just to create a little bit more light intensity peeking through some of these clouds as well. Again, just to give it a little bit more contrast. And then going back to our different color balance adjustment layers and tinkering around with this to make sure that everything is nice and cohesive with our tones. You will even notice, especially throughout this tutorial, I changed my mind a lot. I couldn't quite decide on the colors I wanted, and ultimately, at least just in the beginning process here, I just went with more of the blues and magentas, at least just as a nice starting off point. Again, the colors will change as we go, but this is going to give us a good foundation to build off of. Okay, so this is where we're at least with all the color adjustments for now. Let's go ahead and move on here in a second, and let's just keep working further on our polar bear. And we're going to start off with using a fur brush, and all I want to do is just touch up some of the edges here. I want to kind of exaggerate this texture, the fur texture, make them look a little bit more fluffy. And some of the brushes that I use here, I actually have a tutorial on my channel here of how you can create one of these brushes. So if you want, go ahead and click the link, check it out, and then you can use this and add this to your own brush assets as well for you. So I'm going to take a couple more seconds with this, just touch up some of the edges, and then we can move on to doing some of the lighting adjustments. Alright, so that looks good. We're going to drop in a levels adjustment layer here, clip it below, and just enhance some of these highlights and shadows just to create a little bit of contrast within our polar bear. And then next I want to add a hue and saturation adjustment layer on top of that, because what I want to do is go to our yellows channel, even the reds, and we want to desaturate that. We want them to be a little bit more white and not so yellow looking. And then on top of all of this, we can add another levels adjustment layer because we do have some spots on his left side. So I want to bring out the shadows and push this over to the right. And then we're going to invert that mask by pressing Control or Command I. Going to just a regular soft round brush and painting this in so that way we can just kind of lessen the intensity of some of these spots. We're going to do some more touch up later on with him, but just kind of as an initial startup, this is what we're going to do here. Again, just giving us a good starting off point and just helping us out, setting us up for success here. Alright, so that's looking pretty good just to start out with, like I said. Next, this exposure adjustment layer, we're just going to overall bring down the intensity a little bit and then erasing some of the edges of where that sunlight might be hitting him just to bring out some of these highlights. I'll add more shadows and highlights later. Again, we're just kind of giving us an initial base to start off with and giving us an idea here, a good starting off point. Okay, Perfect. So now we're adding another exposure adjustment layer so we can focus a little bit more on our shadows this time around. Same process, inverting the mask and then just painting some of this back in where we would see those shadows. Alright, and as you can see here, he isn't quite fitting in with our scene, so this color balance adjustment is going to help us out a little bit. We're going to just incorporate some more of the magentas, cyans, and blues, and that by itself is going to help him look a little bit more like he belongs in this environment and he fits a little bit better. So this is a good starting off point. We're going to add another one, and for this one we're going to focus a little bit more of the light that's going to be reflected off of that sunset and that on the background there. So we're going to add more of the warmer tones, invert the mask, and just kind of apply this right where our highlights are that we've kind of left on there. Again, we're going to continue to do a lot more color grading throughout this tutorial. Just want to give us a good starting off point. Okay, but he's starting to look pretty good. We're going to switch back to a fur brush now, and this is actually the brush where you can learn how to make on one of my tutorials. So be sure to check that out. And all we're doing here is enhancing this texture. I want the fur texture to be red pretty visibly from further away. We're starting to lose that, and so this is just going to sharpen up, and we want to exaggerate this fur texture so it just reads from further away. This is also going to help us kind of patch up some of those spots like I mentioned before. So we're doing a couple of things with this. We're touching up the spots, also giving him a little bit more texture, so we're headed in the right direction with this for sure. Alright, going back to our solid color adjustment layer, and this time I just kind of want the shadows on the ground to be this bluish tone here. So we're going to use just a soft round brush, and I'm not going to make a copy of our polar bear, invert them, and do that. I'm just going to kind of freeform this and just kind of make this as organic as possible. It's not going to be perfect. I know shadows can be tricky a little bit of times, but we're just going to wing it, folks. That's all we're going to do here. Alright, just kind of using what my knowledge of how I think this should look with the direction of where the sun is and where this shadow should be placed. Something like this. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect. It's okay. As long as we kind of have the basic idea and the shape of our polar bear, and that should be fine. And we can even just kind of change up this color just a little bit here. Alright, so there's before and after. Alright, we're looking good. I'd like to create some more adjustments here, do a little bit more work, and using this next solid color just to create a little bit more drama within our clouds and some more really contrasting areas, again, just to make it look a little bit more dramatic. And then we can also use another solid color adjustment layer within our ground itself and exaggerating some of these portions here. This one's set on multiply. A lot of times just play around with the blend modes and just see kind of what you like, but multiply tends to work really well, especially when I'm doing work with shadows. And as I mentioned before, I kind of went back and forth with the color grading on here. So right now with this hue and saturation adjustment layer, just slightly altering some of the colors, even within the color balance adjustment layer as well, trying to not maybe go with the so saturated blues and magenta approach and just kind of bringing this back a little bit. Alright, I'm actually going to a cloud brush now, and it doesn't have to be a cloud brush. If you don't have one, you can use a regular soft round brush and sample some of these tones in the background here, because what I want to incorporate now is just a little bit more of that haze and make the transition within our background, make it look a little bit more consistent from the right side to the left. So that's what we're doing here with the soft round brush or cloud brush, just tying these elements in together just a little bit nicer than what we had it originally. I also just want to kind of exaggerate some of these warm tones as well. And now with this color balance adjustment layer, we're going to use this to, again, just tweak these colors just a little bit more. Again, you're going to see this throughout this entire tutorial. I do this quite a bit just to help us out with color grading. It can be a little bit tricky, so it requires a lot of tweaking around, especially throughout as you make little adjustments along the way. Alright, so with this exposure adjustment layer, let's just drop this down a little bit. We're gonna go back to focusing a little bit more on those shadows once more. I've inverted that mask and just some of these areas, not everything, but because we've added the fur and the extra fur on there, I'm using this exposure adjustment layer once more just to kind of bring back those shadows that we kind of lost once we added that texture in. Alright, so let's just spend a couple more minutes with this, or sorry, not minutes, just a few more seconds. I don't need to do too much work on the top because that's where we're going to add our mountains in, so just kind of sticking to the mid body and below, dropping the opacity so it's not too overwhelming. But he's looking good, and now I think we can actually move on to start adding in some of these mountains and the hillside on his back. So with this, we're just using our quick selection tool here just to capture these mountains within this image, just like so. And then once we're happy with that, just as we did originally, we're going to hit that layer mask icon so we have it by itself, drop the opacity so we can kind of get a good idea of where we're going to place this, and just shrink this and even warp this a little bit to his body. As you can kind of see how I'm lining this up with the curves on the backside there. Perfect. And just now erasing the areas that we don't really need. And for this left side here, we can switch to a hard round brush just to make sure that that is a nice edge. Perfect. So going back to the soft round brush, just kind of clearing up some of these areas and try to blend it in and have a nice little transition with the backside here. I know I'm spending a little bit of time with this now, but we're going to make some modifications as we go. Just getting us started here. I made a copy of that, and for this one I'm just focusing on the right side this time. Again, just warping this to help match the shape of that body, and we can nudge this up and then just erase some of this area that we don't need and take out what we don't want. It's just trial and error, you know, just kind of play around with it, sculpt it, see what you like, see what you don't like, and just kind of make those adjustments as you go along. But this is going to be the general idea. We have a lot more to add on to this, and for this section, just as before, we're going to speed through it, so I'm not going to bore you to death, but I will talk over everything so you can see and hear my process as to how I created this. Alright, so with this next image here, I use this one quite a bit, and it's best when you have some of these images to continuously use them so that way everything looks consistent. But I like the soft edges, and that's what I'm using at the base there. For these rocks, I'm going to kind of put this in the background. Pay no attention to the snow on the head there. It was kind of a failed attempt, but I'm still keeping it throughout this process. But just using these rocks here because I want to add a little bit more variation to some of our mountains. And then just kind of experimenting with some of these edges here just to try to blend it in with the body. I'm switching back to a hair and a fur brush for the edges and using this as the transition. Kind of a pet peeve for me sometimes is when I'm seeing some images where you just know it's obvious that they use a soft round brush. So try to use texture brushes when you can, especially if you already have a defined texture within your subject, so that way the blending it just looks nice and it looks a little bit more realistic. Okay, so I'm using these little glaciers down here at the bottom as a different approach for our base. I did struggle with this area quite a bit, so you're gonna see me kind of experiment some different ideas, and I didn't want to edit everything out because I wanted to show you at least my attempts and you know, some of the different experiments that I had. Alright, we're switching to this mountain here, desaturating it, and then adjusting the color so that it fits within our scene here. And I love this mountain. We're going to place it in the back, and because I love it so much, you're going to see me use it a couple more areas on this backside here. But because I don't want it to look exact and make it look identical into each placement, I want to just kind of touch up some of the edges, shape it a little bit differently, so again, so it doesn't look obvious. And then we're going to add one more off on the backside here. Not going to use a lot of it, just kind of a little portion of it. Just kind of that little rock right there. And once you can see, once we start adding quite a few more layers, just trying to find which layer is which and just make sure you get that on the right spot that you need to. Okay. And you can see we have, you know, kind of a cyan, a really light cyan color with a little bit more darker blue. So we're going to touch up some of the colors here in just a second. Just going back to that fur brush to make sure that the edges look a little bit better with the transition. Alright, so now you can see that I'm starting to adjust the colors of the glaciers to make it fit with the rest of our snow. And going back to this first one, that image that I had originally, I thought having this little corner edge looks really cool to have that little beveled side. I just thought it just looked like a really awesome effect, so I wanted to incorporate that with the curvilinear shape by his neck. Once again, bringing back some of those first rocks that we had. And now you can see me going back, trying these different experiments of how I want this to look and blend into the rest of the polar bear itself. So you see this quite a few more times. We're not we're not out of the park yet with that, but for right now, this is what we're going to work with. Moving on, I like it so far. So let's bring this castle in. And obviously I'm using the pen tool just to extract it from its background. I don't need everything, just the main structure itself. So we'll quickly get that away from the sky and add that layer mask on there so we have it by itself. Doing the same thing next now with this image. So I think I've added about 3 different images for our little castle that's going to be on the back side. So this is our second one, and we've got one more. And we're going to use this one here. And as I was looking for these images, I kind of wanted to find a defined placement with our lighting, whether it was on the left or right. And like for this structure itself, we need to flip this so that way the lighting on our structure matches where the light's coming from in our scene here. And then we're just going to scale this down, place it somewhere up on the hillside, just right about here I think is a nice spot. Excellent. And then using a hard round brush tip, we're going to just kind of do a little bit more just so I can kind of see where this rock is, and then just nudge this up ever so slightly. And then now we can come back in here, just refine it a little bit, make sure that those edges look nice, crisp and clean. Alright, so that looks pretty good. And then on the left side here, we can use a soft round brush this time and kind of painting at an angle here so it looks like it's fit right into that little slope there. Yeah, it looks pretty good. And zoom out, see how this looks. Excellent. And now we're gonna just kind of define some of the edges on this side here. Adding a little bit of variety within our snow, kind of adding some elevation so it doesn't look entirely flat and looks like it's nice and snug inside there. And dropping in our first image that we cut out here. We're gonna put this in the back. You're gonna see me kind of moving this around in a couple of different places as I'm trying to figure out how I want this to look, but for right now we're gonna add this in here. And then we can switch to our third castle image, or this cathedral that we're gonna place in here. And again, we just want to find a nice little spot for this. Alright, so let's scale this up a little bit, maybe push this off to the center. I'm thinking I want to add that more of that castle structure just on the right side. So we'll move this to the middle, just like so. We'll move this off to the right, and then make a copy of that by pressing Ctrl or Command J and moving this to the left. I'll scale this up because I want this to be the highest point that we see. And then we can switch to our hue and saturation adjustment layers, and we're going to start doing some adjusting here. So just as before, I'm going to speed through this because it's a bit tedious, but first we're going to desaturate this, and then we can use the color balance adjustment layer to bring in some of those blues and cyan tones to match our mountains and the snow and all of that. So we're doing that right now first. Perfect. Going back to our polar bear, making some adjustments. I know I was constantly tweaking the shadows, especially because I wasn't quite happy with how I liked the look of some of these areas. And then also whenever I added fur on there and made one adjustment, that caused me to now have to go back and make other adjustments. So one little change does make a difference, but you'll see me here just kind of playing around with the shadows a bit. Like I said, I did struggle with this a little bit, but made do with what I had. Anyways, so as I'm doing this shadows here, next we're gonna go back to our fur brush, and I want to use this fur brush for the highlights itself. So I'm using this to kind of enhance some of the coloring and the brighter portions of the light being reflected off of our polar bear, even sampling some of the tones in our sky here, and then using this along the edges of the legs and ears, and just kind of defining this, making that texture just look a lot more pronounced. So obviously the edges are going to be the brightest point, but the light itself is going to actually wrap around the body. So that's what I'm doing right now. First with the hairbrush, and now just with the regular soft round brush, just wrapping some of that light around the body itself. And now we can go back to adding some highlights with our mountains in the structure. And obviously we want to make sure that every single element there matches in tone, so I'm using the color balance for that. and then the snow itself. What happens whenever you introduce shadows, and especially with an exposure or levels adjustment layer, you can see that slightly desaturated as I'm painting there. So what we have to do as well is go back to, well, any color grading tool and just make sure that those shadows are a little bit more blue in tone and not so desaturated and black. It does have a little bit of color to it. But right now, just adding the shadows in between our buildings here, make sure that we're paying attention to how light is going to be interacting with all of our elements within this scene itself. You got to be mindful. Okay, going back to the transition of our snow and the body itself of our polar bear, I would say if there's two elements to this whole piece that I thought or I found to be the most difficult, it would be this transition from the base of the snow to the body itself and the shadows. Now with the base, I didn't want to just have a regular soft round brush blended in. You know, I wanted this to really look like the snow just kind of faded into the fur, and that's why I'm trying to find softer snow patches to use, especially at the base here, and have that just gradually transition into the fur itself. And then instead of just using a soft round brush to fade that in, I'm using this fur brush and that texture to help blend that in with the edges, and those two together I thought made a huge difference, especially with the transition there. Alright, so now we're just going to kind of do some of our final edits here before we wrap this thing up. We do have some minor working to do just on some of these areas within the mountains and some of the edges here. So let's go ahead and just tweak some of these things up, and then we will be wrapping this up here shortly. And then of course I merged all of my layers together in one at the top and put this into the camera raw filter where I did my final color and lighting adjustments for my image. Now, especially with the color grading, I made a few variations just because I liked some different choices, and I just wanted to see how they looked and stacked up against each other. But overall, this is going to be the final image that I ended up with. And as you can see, I did spend a little bit more time after the matter, just kind of making some final adjustments, and you can see I added a snow overlay, which was just put into screen blend mode. Nothing too fancy with that, but this is going to be the final image. Alright everyone, I was actually really happy to give you a tutorial on this Overgrown series. I know the other two were speed arts, and I wanted to give you something a little bit more step by step. Obviously this did still have some speed art edits in there, but as I mentioned before, I didn't want this video to go on for so long. So I hope you liked the video. I hope you found it useful. If you are new to this channel, please hit the like button. Please subscribe if you're not doing so already. It would really help out this channel grow so I can produce more videos for you all. Anyways, I do look forward to having you back again for our next video, and hopefully this time around it's not going to be that long in between the videos. So in between now and then, please be safe, take care, and hope to see you real soon. Goodbye everyone.